All right, so I am live here with Real Lacana, or Brian, as I will be referring to him for the duration of the stream.
Sure.
And
Hey, how's it going?
yeah, I believe we met through Darwin Subspecies. Isn't that?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I've had him on the show 3 times now, and he'd recommended that. Seemed like a good guy. I think we'll have a good conversation today, and maybe set up something in the future. We'll see.
hmm
So, I'm not sure what. How did you get in contact with Eric, a Darwin subspeciest, initially? That's something I didn't ask you.
Yeah, it was I responded to the Covington high school thing,
Okay.
and like a lot of people who blew it, I just kind of saw this I think the luckily the comment I made wasn't too bad. It was I just said, "Look, I don't know what's happening here, but these kids shouldn't be mocking this Native American." And Darwin subspecies, Eric, I guess, I didn't know his real name, but he made some comment about how he was talking about, I don't remember the exact words he used, but he was hitting upon there's this idea about the Solutreans who possibly came from Europe before Native Americans. And he was like, bet you didn't know anything about that or whatever. And I said, actually, I have a degree in anthropology. I know very much about that theory. And I kind of talked to him about it, and he went, oh, okay. And
Yeah.
oh, I mean, I was like, okay, are we fighting here? No, we're not fighting. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
he's a good guy. He definitely likes to rustle feathers on Twitter. So I found him to be a very interesting person to be in conjunction with. So
Right.
yeah, I would say I lean a little more centrist, even though I guess I am kind of a conservative. So he's definitely more on the conservative side of things, being a Texan. But I think that's kind of what makes the internet such an interesting place. You can get a lot of different points of view. So
Absolutely.
well, that being said, we're going to talk a little bit about political correctness and social justice. And I did want to just take a second before we get into that Brian's page, Lacana, is at Real Lacana, and this is his information in case you do want to follow or have a look. So I wanted to get into what I find Wikipedia generally to be the kind of standard anymore. It's not even, oh gosh, I can't even think of who, Myers, who did the original dictionaries? What was the company?
Merriam-Webster.
Merriam-Webster, not Myers. I was thinking Myers-Briggs. Merriam-Webster.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Merriam-Webster, now it seems to be whatever Wikipedia has is normally the kind of metric. So I was going to take a second and just read off the first paragraph of what they say for political correctness, and then we're going to get into kind of what we thought of that. That sounds good.
All right.
So the term political correctness, commonly abbreviated to PC, is used to describe language, policies, or measures that are intended to avoid offense or disadvantage of members of particular groups in society. Since the late 1980s, the term has come to refer to avoiding language or behavior that can be seen as excluding, marginalizing, insulting groups of people considered disadvantaged or discriminated against, especially groups defined by sex or race. In public discourse and the media, it has been generally used as a pejorative, implying that these policies are excessive or unwarranted. I think that kind of goes in line with what I think of what political correctness. It's an avoidance of certain conversations that generally people know that will end in a disagreement or maybe an argument. And so it's like marking landmines in Minesweeper is the way I look at it, and avoiding and staying away. Would you agree?
I think that certainly people use language to try and shut down debate. And you can either do that because you don't have the facts on your side or because you don't want to get into it. But yeah, I think that I mean it's kind of hard to let me just say I agree.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, the thing I wasn't bringing this up to say that we would disagree. In fact, I thought we would. I find that whenever there is maybe a point of contention, it's better to find common ground first than later. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
that if you're gonna sit there and skirmish and take pot shots at each other, you know, I've read a lot of different people's takes on the proper way to debate. You know, avoiding straw man, avoiding ad hominem attacks. There's a lot to avoid. But finding common ground generally avoids the you know, your propensity to go towards those low forms of conversation. And I see political correctness as just another one of those tools, is a way of like you said, stifling debate. And I really think that debate is something that like needs to be had at every age. It's not like, well, we had these debates back in the Socratic era, so we're good. It's like, no.
Right. I think one of the things, I live in California, where it's, I keep telling people California is not the leftist cesspool that other people in the country seem to think it is. I mean, you live in Chicago, so I mean,
I've only been to Chicago for going on 8 months now.
But I actually went to college here in California, and so I took a lot of social related soft sciences, so to speak, classes. I'm kind of a weird person. I went to college for a really long time and only have 2 degrees to show for it. But I've been in the belly of the beast, so to speak. I've listened to a lot of these social justice debates and had college professors. I had a professor one time say, there better not be any Republicans in my class.
Oh, my gosh.
And
that's the opposite of finding common ground, I would say.
Right. So I'm used to hearing a lot of these arguments, and I don't necessarily disagree with all of them. But I think a point that you bring up that is really, really good, and that is you get people who are really far on the left, who have been in an echo chamber so long that they are ready to attack the people they think are the enemies. And as soon as they step out into the sunlight, they're ready to start swinging because everyone who's not in their echo chamber is a Nazi. And oftentimes when they start swinging and they realize that reality is not what they thought it was, they kind of retreat back into their echo chamber, or they just kind of say these crazy nonsense, and everybody outside of the echo chamber just looks at them like they're insane.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you all the way there.
And the problem, I think, is you need to find where the basic point of the disagreement is. Abortion is a good one. If you look at pro-life people as they want to control a woman's reproductive rights,
I think it's a common hop, skip, and a jump people make.
Right. And the whole thing of it's my body, it's my choice. Right. But you're not aborting your body. Right. You know, and so another thing too is so there's that abortion argument. There's the argument about should we tax billionaires to help the poor? And it sounds like
marginalized tax rates, I believe, is the name of the umbrella of conversation.
Right. And it really comes down to, do you value billionaires or do you value poor, struggling folks? And that's the left's argument. Whereas the right-wing argument could be, yeah, but does making people more and more dependent on government actually help them?
Right. I think that's not discussed enough on the left side of things. And right. I think from the left side, looking at the right, is I do my best to look at both. Is like you said, those billionaires is when you give those tax cuts. I know a lot of friends of mine who are on the left say there's a lot of crony capitalism. There's a lot of insider, loopholes, and that's definitely true. Offshore accounts. That's definitely stuff that should be. Just because we're attacking your side doesn't mean that the other side is not culpable either. I think that's another little kind of linguistic judo that isn't fair. It's the idea of the straw man, that as soon as the spotlight's on you, well, it's like no, let's talk about them. It's like we'll talk about that later. We're not having a discussion about that right now.
Yeah, I've read an article not too long ago about how they raised taxes in New York and the tax revenue went down because people that were making a lot of money left. And that's something that you try and explain that to a leftist, is that you can lower taxes and increase tax revenue because people have more incentive to work, have more incentive to stay there, have more incentive to innovate, etc.
You hit the word I was looking for right on the head. Incentive. There is no incentive for capitalists, for innovators, for scientists, in a world where they're not getting money,
Absolutely.
And when I think the leftist agenda a lot of times in this regard is it's retribution, it's seeking it's that, and really it comes down to that victimization. I think it was it's actually in the second paragraph here, political correctness, and they're saying how Dinesh D'Souza in particular in his 91 book Illiberal Education, he condemned what he saw liberal efforts to advance self-victimization, multiculturalism through language, affirmative action, and changes to content in school and university curricula, which is a lot of the things we just discussed. The self-victimization is what I was just about to hit on, is the idea that the identity, which this goes more into social justice, so I'll table that for a minute, but the idea of creating this identity of a class struggle where you have these people who are victims who have been disenfranchised. When you set that identity for a group of people, whether they know why or not, their only discourse now will be retribution, because that is the kind of purpose of that identity, is to seek retribution because they've been disenfranchised. Whether it's true or not, if they choose to believe that they're a victim, which is a lot of this red pilling concept that I don't know if you heard the walk away movement, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's the idea that just because you're black or just because you're, a woman or whatever, you don't need to be on the left. It's not come to the right. It's just think and make your decision. And I think that's one of the big things that debate does free up. It's like, I like to have these conversations with people, but by no means do I want them to agree with me out of my ego. I want them to agree with me because what I said made sense to them, and they can go have this discussion with someone else, which I don't think enough people try to do. I think enough people want to have really strong talking points and rhetoric that can just be parroted. And to me, that doesn't move anything forward,
Right.
What do you think of that? The idea of having intellectual discourse versus rhetorical parrot points.
Well, I think both can have value. Coming up with a good bumper sticker argument certainly can persuade some people.
Right.
People that don't really want to invest the time in listening to you. It's good to do a mix of both kind of arguments. I mean, an example. We had Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday came up.
Right.
And one of the things that Dr. King said in his I Have a Dream speech is he said, I have a dream. And he repeated that several times. And that's a really easy thing to understand.
Right.
Is that he has a vision for the future. And then between those lines, he would talk about his love for the Constitution. And this is something I think a lot of people don't really get. He said, this is the Constitution, and the Constitution is not living up to we are not living up to the values of the Constitution. He had a very pro-American message in that speech.
Right.
But he had to do I have a dream, and it's like the chorus of a song.
It's a call to action.
You can grab onto that.
It's a call to action in a sense, I'd say.
And so that's the brilliance of him as a speechwriter, is that you got to mix that. Here's a really simple message, and here's some meat to it. Here's the verse that explains what's important, and then here we go back to the chorus.
To me, I Have a Dream is like the hook,
Absolutely.
Well, a lot of what he discussed was the verses, and that's what you stay for.
Right.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. One of the things I've been looking into recently is the idea of rhetoric versus dialectic. And I think that kind of goes into it. The dialectic is the verse, what he's telling you. And the rhetoric is what you remember, what you feel. Because I remember being a kid the first time a teacher in a what they call social studies class put on the I Have a Dream speech. And I just remember, I was just like, wow. Like, I didn't know why. I was, grade school. It's just like, this is powerful. Like, I've never heard someone talk this way. The way he spoke, that's the rhetoric. But it's that, to me, just allows you to remember something better. it doesn't mean you learned something from it. And that's where he was
Right.
able to mix both in together. The dialectic side of things, where he taught you to, like you said, be more pro-America, to live up to the Constitution, what it was founded on. But also, sometimes if that's all you talk about and there is no rhetoric, people just don't care. They just move on. They're like, oh, yeah, blah, 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 just another person. You sound more like a Chicken Little if that's all you got. Saying the
Right.
world's gonna end.
It's too much to invest in. And one of the things, it's like when people try and argue with me on Twitter, which is a complete waste of time.
Right.
You're not going to make nuanced political points in 280 characters or less. So generally, if somebody really wants to argue with me on Twitter, I'm just there to entertain myself. And so
the George Carlin approach is what I call it.
Huh. I don't know who that is.
George Carlin?
Oh, George Carlin.
Carlin,
I thought you said Colin. Okay, George Carlin, yeah.
I misspoke. I need a sip of water.
But yeah, and it's one of those things that and sometimes people will, like, if I argue with somebody over like Facebook or something like that, there's more characters, you can kind of get into it a little bit more, and then people will have Google wars with me, which is a complete waste of time. No matter what point someone wants to make, they'll send me an article going, look, this proves everything I'm saying. And I go, I can find plenty of well-researched articles that debunk everything you're saying. And we can go back and forth and have Google wars if you want to. But that's a waste of time.
And it's a whole nother thing. One of the things I get people on all the time is people will send me articles and I will just go to the author. And I'll just look into the author. One simple thing a lot of people don't do is, and the funny thing is, in this day and age, you can even look up the author on Twitter. You can Google them. You can see what other posts they've had. And you can have someone who makes this really polarizing article that looks to substantiate something. And then you go to their Twitter and they're retweeting the Covington kids and stuff. And you're like, oh, okay, well, now it makes sense. Your agenda becomes more clear. And that's one thing I do on social media is I do try to limit the rhetoric and try to stay within my lanes. I try to be a little provocative because I do have a YouTube channel I'm promoting. But, I don't want to get too over the line.
And that's always a challenge, too, when you're trying to say something inflammatory. You're trying to wind people up. You're trying to really get that perfect, shocking, even mean in some cases.
Right.
and sometimes you say things that are not really fair. You know they're not really fair, but you know it'll stir up some stuff and get you some attention. And then you got to balance that with how much of my credibility am I willing to give up just to provoke people. Right. And
I think that you really struck home. That's kind of that's the skin in the game you're putting in. It's part of your image.
Yeah,
that does make sense. And the thing is, the more skin in the game, it's almost like gambling when you think about it. It's like social gambling. It's like what ideologies are you betting on to be the stronger points? It's kind of the way I look at it. Because being a centrist, it's like I try to avoid putting too much skin in the game.
Right. And I was a big fan of Milo Yiannopoulos, and he went on
smarter
the
than
Bill
he gets
Maher
credit
show.
For.
Yeah, he's a really smart guy, he went on the Bill Maher show, and he went into super Milo mode and called people stupid, and I just kind of saw his star just kind of, and he's been going downhill since then, as people kind of feel like he pushed. And that's just my opinion. I think he pushed with the shock too much.
He did.
Too far.
But if you think about it, he was riding the same wave that Trump is now. That actually a lot of people, I think a lot of people don't understand. It's kind of, I joke with some friends that it's like Trump opened the floodgates for rhetoric. It's like we've been flirting with pre-Trump. We've been flirting with the idea. That's the thing is Obama kept things very narrative driven. It's like the status quo was very simple. We didn't color outside the lines. Everyone stayed in their coloring books. And Trump's the kid who just like took a vat of paint and dumped it on top of the coloring book,
Well,
and said you can do whatever you want.
Trump certainly went after the media.
He did.
And
that's huge.
the fact that the media's credibility has been going down considerably, and the media, the whole story with the Covington story is really the media hates Trump so bad that they were willing to attack kids just because they were wearing his hat.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy if you think about it. Trump called them fake news. It's like a chicken or the egg concept, where he called them fake news, and maybe they weren't at the time, but now they are. It's only been proven that. I had heard today that the kid Sandman, who was the smirking kid, he's got 7 attorneys, and he's got a slew of a lot of the mainstream people are getting sued, and he's probably going to win his case. They said some awful things to a high school kid. And you're right, the vitriol was directed directly at Trump, but it's like, you can't do that no matter, like, I think it comes down to the echo chamber idea to me. It's like, in these people's echo chambers, they hear so many other people say such bad Trump rhetoric that when they actually throw it out, like you said, when they open the veil and they shoot it out into the light, it doesn't have the same traction it does within their own echo chambers. Right. And now they have skin in the game, and I'm curious to see what the optics will be moving forward. Because go ahead. Sorry.
And I wonder, like Kathy Griffin, who said, I want these kids' names. I want them doxxed.
Oh yeah. She never even got hit for the beheading of Trump.
Which Trump is a public figure.
Right.
Certainly there have been some really awful pictures and whatever about Obama.
Right.
So that kind of goes with what happened. I mean,
that didn't bother me.
She did lose her job at CNN over that.
Yep.
So she did have some repercussions over that.
But she's still heralded. I do see a lot of tweets that she gets a lot of traction on Twitter still. Which, to me, I'll put it this way: if someone were to do the same on my camp, which is smaller than people think, most people, like, I have friends of mine who attacked me today for saying I support Trump. I'm like, I don't support Trump. I support the president, and he gave a good State of the Union. And they're like, oh, well, you'd support anything he says because you worship him. I'm like, I know I don't. He's not even in my camp. He just happens to be the president, and I'm American. But that being said, if someone who I believe in my camp, like if Ron Paul did the Kathy Griffin, if he like had a beheaded Nancy Pelosi, I would immediately rethink my stance on Ron Paul. You know what I mean?
Right.
But Kathy Griffin she's a comedian. I'll digress off that point that she is
for
the shock factor.
Yeah, and I mean I don't really care. I mean I don't like what she did, but I think that comedians need to have that kind of ground to be able to say whatever they said. Like that Peter guy, I can't remember his last name, who made fun of the guy with the eye patch, Crenshaw.
Oh yeah, that's Pete Davidson.
Right. I wasn't really offended by that. I mean,
and the funny thing is Crenshaw took it well.
Yeah. But it's kind of interesting to me that Kathy can say, hey, I want these teenagers doxxed, and ask her followers to investigate and essentially harass these kids. Is she banned for it? No,
not at all. Well, and the funny thing is actually the live stream I modeled this after, eventually I'd like to get a community going, is off a guy named Owen Benjamin. And he got banned off Twitter. I don't know if you know too much about him.
He plays the piano and he sings funny political songs.
That's him. Yeah, he's a comedian. He's a jester. He doesn't care. He's very anti-PC. Actually, he says some things that are way over my line, but the fact that he's doing it is in an era of PC. I just support him there. He says some things that I'm just like, whoa, all right, man. But I'm just like, I'm glad you're doing it, and I'm curious to see how it works out for you. But he, in particular, he was making fun of David Hogg, the kid, and he made a joke. The tweet that got him off Twitter was, he said, I don't listen to someone who doesn't have their pubes yet talk about guns.
Right.
And because of that tweet, he got banned. That was what they cited. Now, that's funny. Like, if you're a comedian, That's nothing near the posting of a beheading of the president. That you know, you know what I mean. When you look at, and this is one of the things that I think is going to in the future become much more prevalent, is the favoritism of a lot of the left, as far as maybe the social medias, the people with the means to control the information and debates. It's going to be more evident that a lot of right-leaning people are being censored at a rate that's not equal, ironically, from the people who claim to be all about equality, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that example is perfect because he insulted someone who's 18 years old, legally an adult, and he's not just some innocent kid.
He's an activist.
He's an activist. So he's putting himself out there. He's trying to become a public figure.
Right.
Now, contrast that with the verified director who did a picture, made a meme showing him putting the Covington kids who were minors into a wood chipper. Not banned.
Oh my God. Yeah, I saw that.
So
like that, people had retweeted that showed up in my stream, and I was like, is this real? Like, I had to like go and I like Googled the name of that. I think it was someone who worked on Disney's animation team or something was the guy who released it. And
I don't remember, but
he was an animator for Disney. And then I like looked up his credentials because I'm the kind of person, when I see something that out of the ordinary, I fact check, and then I fact check again, and then I double check the fact checking I had just when it's that out of the box. And I'm like, how does someone get away with putting kids in a wood chipper? Like,
yeah,
that to me, that was worse than the Kathy Griffin thing, just because, like you said, it was the optics of the president and a comedian. And then when you break it down, now it's an animator and a kid. It's like, that completely changes the entire politics of the situation. And I hope that Sandman can get whatever, you know, they end up the trauma being worth it. Because I don't think being doxxed by the media and, you know, everything that came his way is fair in any way. I'm not big on suing the shit out of people. Like the whole McDonald's burn thing, I think is the hyperbole for bad lawsuits. But I think this is actually a pretty just lawsuit. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that and just the fact that Kathy Griffin asked her followers to harass someone.
That's a whole nother thing too. I didn't even touch on that. And that's actually something that I know YouTube and Twitter's looking into, like the weaponization of online mobs. They've been talking about the idea of dislike mobs because recently, last Friday, Jack Dorsey was on the Joe Rogan. Yeah. And he got ratioed extremely hard. It was like an over 80% margin of dislikes. And one of the first things I think both Joe Rogan and Twitter came out and said and YouTube, is they're going to get rid of dislike options on things like that. To me, that is like, if you're being accused of censorship, that's doubling down hard by getting rid of the dislike option.
Yeah, which
I don't think it's going to diffuse the situation.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument the dislikes either come from people just don't like Twitter in general, or the fact that Joe Rogan really didn't ask him very tough questions. So what is the dislike for? That's the camp
I reside in. That's where I like to hope most people do reside, and I hope it wasn't, like you said, just the general hate towards Twitter. I think it's a combination of the two, and I think it'd be very hard to separate what, you know, how many of the people were, it was just generalized hate towards Twitter versus the people who were. But a conversation I had with a friend of mine the other day was when you think about, because it was ratioed quite quickly. Like within the first 12 hours of being released, it was already ratioed, which makes me think that those are people who are subscribed and have the bell click notification, just like I do for Joe Rogan. I listen to it live. And I actually didn't dislike it right away. I'm kind of the person who I like to sit and wait and maybe listen to a few other viewpoints before I like to go into something. And it made me think that it had to have been his subscribers that were the ones disliking it, because your online lynch mob wouldn't even have an opportunity to mobilize unless they were just dead set on disliking it from before it even happened.
That could be, but I mean, I don't think I don't think there are a lot of people subscribed to Gillette.
That's true too. Yeah.
So I mean, it certainly does happen that people spread stuff
I guess we're
over the
taking
internet.
public opinion into question with these situations. I really don't know. I happen to be residing in the majority in both of these scenarios, so I'm kind of in a wait and see. Yeah, I don't really know where this is going to go, and I think it's interesting. I'm very hopeful. I'll put it that way. I think that there's enough thinking people. I think dialogues like we're having right now, happening all over the country, world in general. I think there's a lot of change going on, and I think that having free independent platforms like this is what's going to allow that. You know what I mean? Stepping away from the doctrine, legacy media.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of want to digress because I feel like we got into this really controversial discussion sphere.
Well, we're talking about social justice. We're going to get into controversial.
Yeah. How about this? How about I play that little gumball video real quick, and then we can switch gears from maybe political correctness more towards the social justice side of things, which I think we can agree is probably not the best for the future. If we buy into this doctrine, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna play that real quick, and then we'll reconvene.
All right, sounds good.
What's going on here?
He asked me to plug him into Rambler.
Rambler? What is that, a website?
It's more like a bare knuckle fight to see who's the most tolerant person on the internet.
Why? Isn't tolerance about being philanthropic?
What? Just thinking about wiener dogs. But yeah, no, tolerance on the internet these days is more about destroying people in an argument.
I know Kung Fu.
Show me.
Have you ever tried whole grain bread? It's far better for you. Not everyone can afford organic stores, Carmen. Maybe you should check your privilege. I just meant that eating too much processed food is a big factor in weight gain, and what? Big people shouldn't be proud of who they are? No, of course not. I mean, ask your doctor and he will tell you. He? Why would you assume the doctor is a he? Is it because you assume a woman can't be a doctor? What is this? I have studied the martial ways of the social justice warrior. Fight me in an argument if you dare. Perish under the sword of my self-righteousness. But Gumball, exploiting those powers to win some petty argument will just hurt the cause of the people who really need our help. Wait, no, my powers! Instead of fighting, why don't we just hug it out? Wait, stop! What are you doing? I forgive you. No! The shame I got! It's all coming back at me!
And I can't even be angry about it.
I always like that video. I think it's a really good tongue-in-cheek look at both sides of social justice, where you have the rise of this person who didn't know anything about social justice, and then they get completely judoed by someone who just says, why don't we just get along? Just like a really simple concept. It's just like, well, what if we do live in a just society and everything's fine? You know?
Yeah.
So I was going to do the same thing we did before with the Wikipedia. I was going to read real quick what Wikipedia says social justice is, and then we can break it down. And it looks like, I just want to take a look at time. We're about 34 minutes. I was going to do about an hour.
Sounds good.
Okay. So social justice is a concept of fair and just relations between the individual and society. This is measured by the explicit and tacit terms for distribution of wealth, opportunities for personal activity, and social privileges. In Western as well as in older Asian cultures, the concept of social justice has often been referred to the process of ensuring that individuals fulfill their societal roles and receive what was their due from society. In the current global grassroots movement for social justice, the emphasis has been on the breaking of barriers for social mobility and the creation of safety nets and economic justice. So I think that's actually a very fair description of it. It's very impartial. I generally put a negative spin on it because I don't think it really works too well.
Right.
my biggest thing is, I'll lead in real quick with my take, is I find just the wording social justice as an oxymoron. Is, to me, justice is a very objective concept. I know a lot of lawyers would probably verify that justice is supposed to be objective. It's not supposed to be something that's gray. But social, in and of itself, the more people you involve in a concept, the more it becomes subjective by the definition of the word social. So you're taking a word that's subjective and putting it next to one of the words that's supposed to be one of the most objective words in the language. And then you combine them together. To me, that's an oxymoron.
Yeah, that definition hits on, obviously it's hitting on cultural Marxism or Marxism in general. And there are a lot of people on the left that are convinced of this idea that I strongly disagree with. They're convinced of the idea that the only way a person can be rich is if there are people that are poor. As
that
in,
has to be like a predatory or like a parasitic approach where there's someone gaining and someone losing more than a mutual,
right?
Like a zero sum.
And the reason why most people should find this really odd is because the idea is that it's not possible to create wealth out of nothing. It's this idea that the only reason why you can have wealth is if you take it away from other people, which is absurd.
Right.
But that's really the entire basis
for the concept.
Yeah. And so if you believe that you cannot create wealth out of nothing and then it has to be taken from someone else, then you believe an injustice has happened.
Right. That has to be the basic tenet of being a social justice warrior, is that there is injustice and I am now a warrior that needs to correct the system. Now, that's not to say that I think there are situations where social justice, by this definition, is very necessary. There are corrupt societies. There are situations where you do. And there are situations where people do need these safety nets. They do need, there are exacerbating circumstances. But the thing is, I think it needs to be limited quite a bit, actually. I think the nuance is really where people struggle in this scenario, where you have the people on the far left believing that there should be I'm kind of tackling a broad topic here, because there's like the emotional side of social justice, well, in the safe spaces. There's the economic, as far as like welfare, and this isn't a very simple issue, but to me is like you said, is if you believe that there's injustice and that it's prevalent and that you're this white knight on a crusade, the world's not going to be, it's kind of goes back to that idea of if you give a man a hammer and everything's a nail, he's going to try to hit everything. I think that's the problem with the modern social justice warrior archetype, is they see injustice in all things and they feel that they need to correct everything. Well, my argument would, on the converse, would be that they probably just don't understand things fully. And that's why I don't get outraged over so many things, because there's a lot of things that I see that might be unjust, but I'm like, you know what? I probably just don't understand the situation correctly. Instead of inserting myself as this authority figure, I'll come as a humble person looking to learn more, instead of this person who's going to try to just stick a wrench in everything and make it the way I see it. Right.
And the Covington case is a perfect example.
Yeah, perfect example. You're right.
There's a lot of people that were hammers. and they saw nails.
Oh, there were straight wedges. It wasn't even nails. There were wedges and sledgehammers, not even hammers and nails. Yeah.
And I think it really unfortunately comes back down to this idea. And I think that young people tend to be particularly susceptible to social justice because they're told. I think the education system is a big part of why this happens. I think a lot of kids who are teenagers feel like the world is really complex. They might just say, hey, I'm just a kid. What do I know? And they're really kind of open-minded. But it's when they go to college
that it becomes weaponized. Yeah.
Right. And the reason why I think this isn't really that controversial an opinion. I think this is what most people would agree, is that I spent a lot of time in college. And like, holy crap, I spent a lot of time in college. I wanted to do everything. That's why I spent so much time in college. I mean, I was a music major for a long time. I was psychology, history. I did all this stuff, and I went to college from like 20 years I spent in college.
Interesting. Well, it definitely makes you an authority as far as being able. Actually, I don't know that many people that would have 20 years worth of experience worth to see the evolution. You know, it really does kind of make you an authority figure in this regard.
Yeah. But one of the things that I can tell you from college professors is there's two different kinds. There's the kind that really loves the field. They absolutely love the field. They're really smart. They're really talented. And they love the field so much that they would rather go into teaching so they can inspire the next generation of young people to go into that same field because they just love it that much.
Their love for it. They want to expand their love for it into other people.
And I've taught myself. I taught music for a long time. I love music. I love music theory. I love a lot of that. And I loved inspiring young people to go out and do that.
I play a little trumpet myself amateurly.
Cool. And then there's the other type of teacher. The type of teacher that is really, really angry that they were not good enough to make it in the field. And that they want to pass on that same anger and bitterness towards a field and a world that rejected them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I've seen that. I've seen a lot of teachers like that. There was a teacher that I had, a history professor who I took American history from this guy. He was really knowledgeable, really knew his stuff. I've even seen my college professor interviewed, like he was on the Neil Cavuto show on Fox News.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was like, that's my college professor.
Okay.
So
what was he discussing while he was on the show?
Oh, I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
But he was angry about something, and he was knowledgeable, but he was angry, and he really pushed. The class that I took, he really pushed his hate for Republicans. He talked about Lincoln wasn't really that great a guy.
Reagan was a devil.
Right.
Yeah.
And some students, I didn't, but some students complained to the dean about him. He actually got in trouble, and then he spent an entire class period ranting and throwing a temper tantrum for an entire class period. And I'm sitting there going, this is what our money is going towards?
That's my first thought.
This child can have a temper tantrum?
That's my first thought there. Oh my goodness. But it's like a therapy session for a grown man that a bunch of kids are watching. Or, and, who's ever in the class. I assume it's an undergrad class.
And I remember lots of other classes that I took where a student could get up and they could talk about how much they hated Republicans. And the other students I'm just curious, like trained seals.
What classes or what fields were these in? Were these in your humanities, I assume? I would hope. Not in like a...
Yeah.
Okay.
So in one of my math classes no, I'm just kidding.
I was going to say math class. That'd be a problem.
No, but I took a lot of anthropology classes. Obviously, that's what I got my degree in. I took a lot of history and sociology classes, and this was a dominant thing, is that you could say even the most outlandish stuff. You could say all Republicans kick puppies, and everyone in the class would go, like
the bunch of seals
like
clapping,
animals, and it was just ridiculous. But that's what it was like. And for me, there are legitimate things. I mean, it's social justice warriors aren't wrong about everything.
No, I think that's one of the worst things about the bad ones is that there's good ones who are actually trying to make progress in this world.
Yeah. And that's one of the
point.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest problems that social justice warriors cause is they go off on the stupidest crap. And that becomes the narrative, and not, oh, here are real actual problems happening. They get lost.
Well, there's a sociology and psychology is a bit of a hobby of mine. It's something I've read a lot about after college. I consider myself a perpetual scholar. I'm always trying to read into something. But have you heard of the concept of the Overton window?
Yes, but I can't think of what it is right now.
The Overton window, it's a very simple concept. It just has a name by someone who brought it up, Edward Overton, I don't know. I'm pulling it up on Wikipedia now. Joseph P. Overton. And it's the concept of what is being discussed in public discourse, where the Overton window, obviously you have the radical on one side and the radical on the other, and he brought up just the idea of freedom. You could create a metric scale on virtually every binary in society, but it's simply the idea that what is being talked about. And the thing is, by stretching the Overton window, you open up what is more available to be discussed. Or if a side is winning in a particular domain, it shifts the Overton window. So why I bring this up is when you have these radicals bring up certain points, it does bring more of what's sensible in your camp into the centrist domain. And I'm curious if you think that might be part of the agenda, where if you can push things, like, to me, one of the movies I love is the movie Django Unchained. Have you seen Django Unchained? Okay. Well, without ruining the movie for you, there's a particular scene that's very important. One of the slaves is trying to free his wife, and she is a slave. And so they're going to a slave plantation, and they're trying to buy the wife. But it's during the pre-Civil War, and of course you don't want to just buy a woman, a house slave. So what he does is he and a white man, they're both free. They go to the plantation. They say, "I'd like to buy one of your fighting Negroes," because the man he did Mandingo fighting, under the guise of trying to make that $20,000 purchase. But once you have the conversation going for such a high purchase, then you shift down a gear and you say, well, why don't you throw in her? And then you never make the purchase in the first place. So I'll digress from that metaphor because I find it it was something that I saw very nuanced and well done in that movie. But it's the idea that if I can sell you, I'll try to sell you on communism, but I'll settle for socialism. It's kind of like the idea.
Yeah. So
if I can sell you on this and you don't buy, but if I can shift you down a gear, it's kind of bait and switchy. That's the idea of the Overton window. If we can start talking about certain, I feel like I've talked myself into a corner here because there's a lot of different ways I'd like to go. But I'd like your take on the Overton window.
First of all, it's not what I thought it was. So
okay, yeah.
It's good that you explained it. I definitely do see that happen to some degree. If you were to look at what was the Republican Party like 20, 30 years ago? And you could say, well, a lot of them were pushing really heavy social conservative values. I'm way older than I look, or I'm even older than I look, one of the ways. But I remember when Bob Dole was running for office against Bill Clinton, and he talked about how R-rated movies, the R should stand for rejected, and Hollywood should just never release them.
Right.
And it's really hard to be a big fan of the Republican Party. I've been a registered Republican all my life, and to go, yeah, but my side is saying that R-rated movies are profane and shouldn't even exist. I mean, my side is really pro-censorship, and you'd never have a Republican running for office now that would say something that ridiculous. And I love, I was happy to vote for Bob Dole. I like everything he stood for, except for there was some parts of the Republican Party I really was not happy with.
Right.
And for me, I've always supported gay marriage. I've always believed in I mean, I've never been a really religious person. And so I think that a lot of evangelical Christians really had a really strong push in the Republican Party, and that comes all the way down from the Southern Strategy, which that's way beyond the scope of what we're talking about right now.
Right. I follow you.
But but following what you're saying, if you're saying, okay, the Republican Party was really authoritative, pushing social values, which are great values to have for you,
right?
But not right, and that's what the Republican Party should be about.
And
that's what conservatism.
Anymore,
And so as Republicans were trying to take those values and push them on everyone else, you could make the argument that people on the left were pushing so hard to get away from that they were successful.
Right. That
now the Republican Party has said you can't oppose gay marriage and be competitive on the national stage.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't push different ideas. Now, I've noticed that pro-life seems to finally have a majority, whereas most Americans support that. But
there's been a lot of
kind of
optics
interesting
recently that I think has changed that. I think it's a multivaried influence that I'll put it this way: 2 years ago, I was completely pro-choice. I would have fought you over it. Now I'm completely pro-life, and now I'll fight you over it to the converse.
I'm still pro-choice, so if you want to fight.
I mean, when I say fight, I mean that in jest. I'd like to find common ground. Actually, I just did a stream on it on my own the other day, but I don't think it's worth it right now. I can have you on again and we can talk about it. But
just kidding.
I think the big thing, the reason I brought up the Overton window as it applies to today is actually the Overton window is a fairly new concept, I believe. There's a book written in 2010, The Overton Window. So it's a fairly new, or that was by Glenn Beck. Go figure. But it's the concept that in the middle you have policy, and then diverting in both directions from policy, in the center of the Overton window you have popular, sensible, acceptable, radical, and then unthinkable. And I think one of the things about our modern society, both in the more freedom and the less freedom side of things, is you're getting both extremes. The Overton window is expanding in a way that I'm still coming to terms with some of the things we did last year. There's certain things like how is there still a war on drugs when just about every entertainer I follow preaches about smoking weed, or some people I know, they're pushing way more than that, more than I would even ever try. Like all these what's the name for these opioids, they're pushing for all these. It's like, how is there still this war on drugs when you have this it seems like this archaic concept. It's like having archers when certain people have muskets. It
right.
just seems like an odd juxtaposition when we're battling over certain things, and the culture has shifted so quickly. And to me, that's the concept of the Overton window. It's like policy is sitting in the center while the extremes have expanded, where this Overton window, which is supposed to be smaller, is becoming much larger. And I think that's where this opening for social justice has come into play, because you have people who they see things from their side of the radical angle, and they see their opponents on the other side of the radical angle, but they don't even understand where policy and what's popular truly lies. And the people who are in the center, they also have a hard time knowing what is policy, what is popular anymore. Because now the focus, based on the media, on all the clickbait stuff, it's all on both sides. You have the Covington situation. You had Charlottesville, where we had actual Nazis displaying white supremacy. If I would have told you that was going to happen 2 years ago before Charlottesville, would you? I would have laughed. I've been like, seriously, real Nazis, real white supremacists? How many?
All of them.
You're right, all of them. That's the thing is, if you're on the right, you laugh them off. Like most of the people, they're like, oh, so that was all the Nazis. They all showed up. They all gathered.
Yeah.
And the thing is, on the left, you see them, and you see that's like the tip of the iceberg. They're like, everyone is like that.
What I wished is if Antifa and these alt-right, if they both would have had cars and ran each other over, and then we could be done with that.
Some like Twisted Metal stuff. They would have just duked it out in their cars.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people
that would have been social justice.
There you go. You know, and I see people that I think you're legitimately a centrist, but I see some people that will try and say the alt-right, that's the far right, and Antifa, and I'm just here in the middle because I'm cool.
Right.
And I don't see the alt-right as right-wing at all. The values that they have, that's why they're an alternative to the right, just like left is alternative to the right.
Right.
If you keep going away from I mistrust government, that's right-wing ideology. You keep saying I want a smaller, more efficient government.
That's why
you keep going further right, you don't get to authoritative Nazism.
No.
You get to anarchy, which is also bad.
Well, actually, the funny thing is,
very different reason.
Right now on Twitter, I'm interacting with a bunch of anarchists, and they're teaching me their ways. Because like I said, I'm a centrist, and I seek to look at all points of view. And I'm a centrist, but I look to find places where I can put skin in the game and be like, this is part of what I stand for. And by that definition, I do consider myself a libertarian, because I believe in the emancipation of the individual, and like you said, less government. Anarchy to me has always been a dirty word, and actually just today I had a discussion with several declared anarchists, and I was telling them, I was like, to me anarchy is a dirty word, and they're like, well, here, I'll have you on my podcast, or we'll be on your podcast, and we'll have that discussion in the future. But you hit on, I just wanted to make that note, but you hit on the point, is further right from conservative is not fascism. It's one of the biggest like word tricks that's ever, or historical tricks that's been played, is that fascism is on the left. It's absolutely, when you look at it from a statist versus anarchist perspective. And I still, anyone who tells me, oh, you're a Nazi because you're right wing, I'm literally just stunned. I'm like, so we have to go through this issue? I was ready to talk about progress, but we need to I need to give you a history lesson on FDR and the New Deal here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the things that I found kind of irritating. Some really dumb person got into an argument with me, and I don't know how much smarter this makes me that I was willing to argue with him back. So this doesn't make me look all that great. But but he was talking about how so the Venezuelans voted for socialism.
Right.
They wanted democratic socialism, where the government has complete and total control, holds elections, and whatever the people decide, the government then implements. Because that's always worked, right?
Right. Chavez and Maduro have both rewritten the Constitution several times to suit their needs.
And when people are like, well, when Maduro was elected, the election was rigged. Of course it was rigged. That's the point.
It's been rigged every time.
Is because
it started with a military coup.
Right, when the government has complete and total control over a country, they go along with whatever the people vote for until it's no longer convenient.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they'll even pretend like, well, this is what the people voted for. That's what happened.
Yeah.
And anarchy, obviously we could get mired into anarchy for a long time, but I'm just going to say quickly, if you look at egalitarianism and you're looking at a hunting and gathering tribe, egalitarianism is a really good way to go.
It is, yeah.
And it works great for small hunting and gathering tribes. But as soon as the tribe gets big enough that people can leech off the system without working and without repercussion, then egalitarianism falls apart, and then you need government. This is why anarchy will work in small groups of people, but if you extend that and more people can leech off the system,
the larger the community, the more anarchy fails. Anarchy works well in raiding parties of Huns and Saxons, but it doesn't always work so well when you're trying to establish a empire that spans the globe. You know, And just I always like to go back to the layman. Egalitarian, relating to or believing in the principle that all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities. So I knew what it means, but I think it's always nice for a refresher, especially when it's not common nomenclature.
Sure.
But
absolutely.
Yeah, I think your point of view on Venezuela is spot on. I think it's a perfect case study. I mean, if anyone my age or younger is still like, oh, socialism might work, it's like, yeah, in concept, but we have a history right here of one of the most wealthy countries. And disclaimer, I was actually born in Maracaibo, Venezuela. I was born in I was born in Venezuela in 92. Of all times to be born in Venezuela. But I moved here to the States when I was 1. My father was American. I was raised in east of Cleveland, Ohio. But yeah, I know I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I've been hearing Venezuelan politics, and my family's always kept me abreast on what's been going on. And it's like, if you still believe in socialism, just point right there. It's happening right now. We're watching socialism fall because of it not working. Not only that, but if they just socialism actually might have been able to work in Venezuela given their oil reserves. That if it was going to work, that would have been the place to do it. They would have had the money. They could have made a socialist utopia, but the reality of socialism occurred, and it became extremely corrupt. And here we are. The people don't have food. They don't have basic medical. You're having a humanitarian crisis where people are they're saying migrant caravans on a scale that the Hondurans and what was the other country that had a lot of migrants?
Colombia?
I think they're going to Colombia, but recently on our Mexican border, I think there's Hondurans and Nicaraguans, I believe, were this socialism, this belief that you can exist on the state and marry yourself to the state. It just doesn't work. You need to get back to the individual. It's kind of where I'll digress from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is something that I don't know why this doesn't come into the equation, but if you take away the incentive to work, people will stop working. Right. And it's just like people on the left just don't believe you when you say that.
They don't. Yeah. And here's the thing is I never have found what the bedrock is for that thought. Because philosophically, I think that whenever I'm talking to someone, and there's a point of contention, a conflict ideologically, I generally find that there's a memory or an instance of their lives that they're clinging to, which makes them oppose me. So I think my job as a debater is to find what that moment in their life was and either learn from it, because I might be wrong. Whenever I debate someone, I always go into a debate thinking I might be completely wrong. So I go into that seeking to find what that defining moment was or what experience they had, whether they went to college, whether they went on a study abroad, a lot of things that change people's perspectives. And I have yet to find what makes people think socialism works. I've read Marx. I've read, I can't say I've read extensively, but I've read a lot of these doctrines, and it sounds good. It's all an emotional argument to me. But objectively speaking, it hasn't worked ever. So you can't point to history. You could say China kind of worked, but they're kind of capitalistic anyway, and they did it through some of the most grisly fashion possible. So I wouldn't say it worked either. Yeah. So I don't know. I just kind of put my hands up in the air and say, prove me wrong, and I never really get proved wrong. It's one of those situations where I don't want to be proved right because it normally makes them get mad at me. Yeah. Because like I said, it goes back to emotion.
There's a meme that I saw one time, and it just shows all these socialist and communist countries where things are on fire and the buildings are collapsing in it. And the caption says something like, if only we could try socialism just once to see if it works or not. Yeah. And that's what it'll come back down to, is you can point to all of these problems and it'll always come back to, that's not true socialism. That's not true communism. That's totalitarianism. Yeah. And there's never going to be another outcome other than totalitarianism. And the only way that they can really kind of say, well, look at the Nordic model. Look at Sweden. Look at Denmark. Look at these countries.
Yeah.
These countries that really aren't socialists.
No.
And even leaders in these countries have
Not
said,
only
Bernie
that, but-
Sanders, stop calling us socialists. We're not.
Right. Well, that's the one thing. First off, you're right. They're not completely socialist. The other thing is we're getting some very interesting data, and I do follow a lot of the sociologists and political analysts who look at this, and what we're finding is that it doesn't really work, and if it does work, it has to be in the micro, like we were discussing before. The smaller the government, the better it has a chance of working, but even then, like we were discussing earlier, the incentive gets lost. And I do want to make another point here, is to get back to the political correctness side of things, of equity versus equality, is one of the big things is gender differences, and they were trying to push to have more male nurses and female engineers. And what they found that is as soon as they gave people the freedom to choose, it became a huge negative bell curve or whatever. There was no one sitting in the middle. It all skewed in either direction. All the females went to nursing, all the males went to engineering. It's just a preference. And it's like the social engineering of trying to make things equitable, it just doesn't work. Equality is the goal. Like you said, an egalitarian society, not in a society full of equity. Have you looked into that at all? Of like these four standards for the sake of equity, not equality? Yeah,
I have lots of arguments with people over the years. And I had a feminist who was arguing with me about the STEM fields and all this stuff, and I said something and it ended the conversation.
Okay.
And I used to, in addition to going to college for a really long time, I've run a couple of companies, none of which particularly were successful. But at one point I ran a game development company, and we created simulations for Fortune 100 companies, and we did some cool stuff, but never really got it off the ground.
Okay.
Well, not sustainable, I should say. I lost money on that company. But I would say probably out of the different people that have worked in my company, I've had about 100 people that applied as programmers. And out of that 100 people, one of them was a woman. Now, let's say, I'm trying to say, well, in my company, diversity is important.
Right.
And I want women make up half the population. They should make up half of our engineers.
Right.
Okay.
I'm going with you hypothetically here, because I could talk a lot.
So when 99 men apply for a position and one is a woman, and she was even an African American. Man, that is
intersectionality, man.
Exactly. Ooh. And I interviewed her. I liked her. She was really driven. She had run a company before, a food company. She didn't have any programming skills
at all,
but not really.
Oh, okay. No. Applicable.
So she wasn't qualified for the job.
Okay.
But I thought she was driven.
Okay.
I liked her personality, and I said, okay, look, obviously I can't hire you because you don't know how to do this job, but I'll tell you what, I will give you access to our servers. I will point you in direction of tutorials you can go, and you know, on your own time, just kind of just making clear, I'm not hiring you, but I'm giving you the option to kind of learn, and we'll see how you do. And I saw that she had logged in. She didn't do any of the tutorials, and that was kind of the end of it.
Oh, yeah.
But the point is that when I look at somebody who's a minority, I legitimately believe that minorities have more struggles. And I thought that maybe she had the personality that maybe she could. So I really did make the effort. And who knows why she didn't do it? Maybe she got a better opportunity somewhere else.
And it's not even
it could be anything.
Yeah.
Right. But the point I'm trying to make here is that to go back down to I'm trying to do 50-50, but this is the reality of the people that apply.
Right.
So if my point is I don't care, I'm going to say no to these more qualified people simply because they're white males.
Right.
That's just dumb.
It's ignoring
It's dumb.
competency. You know?
Right.
You'd think, well, in a capitalistic model, just to get back to that capitalistic, socialistic precedent we've kind of been discussing, is if you're trying to run a successful capitalistic company, wouldn't you just want the top competent people, regardless of if they're purple 7-foot giants or if they're 2 feet, brown midgets?
And
like,
we
cares?
saw this. Yeah, we saw this happen in the sports industry decades ago. There were some teams, they said, I don't care that other teams are letting black people onto their team.
Right.
We're not doing it.
Right.
We're keeping white only, and they got destroyed.
Yeah, that's
and
actually
they
a really
kept
good
losing.
example. I've never really thought about that much because I do come to this equity equality debate quite a bit. And I never considered sports as an example, but you're right. Because when it first started, the integration, a lot of teams suffered because they weren't accepting, let's face it, black athletes.
Right.
And they were losing because of it. And that literally is an example of the free market as far as, the competitive structure of sports goes, settling the debate of bigotry. You couldn't afford to be a bigot anymore.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of companies right now that are suffering for their woke politics, as they call it. I know EA is actually one of the things I just happened to be reading this morning is that EA is suffering a major loss for this quarter because of their inclusivity when it comes to a lot of points with their new games, like adding female and black characters into a World War II game. It's like, you can't just rewrite history. And here's the thing, you can't rewrite history if you're claiming to be a World War II simulator. You know what I mean? Right. If you're just making a game like Fortnite, cool, fine. Right. Or if it's in the future, fine. But you can't make a World War II game and just sprinkle women and black people and
and give them cyborg limbs.
Right. Oh, so you saw the video I was talking about, where So it's like they're suffering, and here's the worst part of the whole thing is demonizing your consumer base, because I think one of the things EA came out and said was like, we have a bigoted audience, or I forget exactly how they phrased it, but they said something. It's like you guys are. They said something really inflammatory, like you guys are just basement trolls or something along those lines. It's like you need to become cultured. I was like, why would you ever go about this if you're trying to sell to these people? The example the YouTuber I was watching made, it's like when you go to a deli and they give you a sample of a sandwich, and it's like it's a roast. He said he used roast beef and mango. It's like, it's a good sandwich. I like roast beef, but could you take the mango out? I'd like it a little better. And they're like, no, fuck you. It's like, okay, well, I'm not buying the sandwich now. It's like, you can't give out free samples, have your customer base give you feedback, and then tell them to fuck off for giving you their opinion.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. They're just not going to buy it. And now EA, I guarantee you, they're going to do some damage control, and it's going to be along this political correctness line that we've been discussing. This is a prediction I'll make, is they're going to cry wolf again. They're going to say, oh, poor EA, we're just trying to... And I'll be honest with you, I think they're going to appeal to women. They're going to appeal to this women's march, this feminist demographic. I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to get more women to play video games. And they're saying, fuck guys, we don't care how many guys, because I think they're going from an arrogant approach. These are all my speculations. They're going to say, you guys are going to buy our games regardless. So from a business standpoint, I think they're just trying to add women. And it's really shooting them in the foot. Because to go back to our Scandinavian example, women just don't care about video games as much as guys do. And now they're suffering. They got a little too overzealous. They assumed guys would just stick with them through thick and thin. And these women aren't buying their games. So now they're stuck in the middle where they just shot themselves in the foot. And this new audience they're appealing to just is not interested. They'll support you on Twitter, but they're not going to buy and play your games.
Yeah. I think about, like, what was the move for Gillette? To say, hey, men, stop being rapists.
Yeah. Well, and they tried to do the reasonable man. They tried to make it a sensible thing. It's like, come on, just be a little less rapey. It's like, well,
Yeah.
I never was that rapey to begin with.
Right.
You know, because the majority of the men who watch that, it's like scolding it's the idea of scolding your audience. And I listen to a lot of comedians. Honestly, comedy is the only thing that keeps me sane in this day and age. And you got to find good comedians because they're hard to find. I forget who it was. Someone had brought up the point. It's like when a true rapist sees that Gillette ad, they don't go, "Oh shit, I had this rape going on Friday. Fuck, I gotta shave my face. I can't rape and shave my face. Thanks, Gillette. Thanks for letting me know." It's like their point can only be inflammatory. You know.
Yeah.
They can't say that they were doing it from a benevolent stance, because that's not how you go about being benevolent towards stopping toxic masculinity. So I already did a video on that. I'll digress from that. I thought it was a complete, utter waste. And I honestly, from a business standpoint, I don't even know what the hell they were thinking.
I can see the whole, hey, this is a hot topic issue. If we hit on social justice, it's big now. It'll create a controversy. That'll get our name out. I understand it. I think that's different from we're putting out an all-female Ghostbusters, and if you don't like it, you're a misogynist.
Well,
and that was the marketing before the movie came out.
Right. They like preemptively were ready for their own backlash.
But you notice that Black Panther didn't do that.
They didn't.
At least in my opinion. They said, hey, this is a good movie.
Yeah. The
end. Not, if you don't like it, you're a racist.
Right. And I actually liked Black Panther. I thought it was...
I did too, yeah.
It was a good movie. It wasn't like... didn't it get... it got the highest box office, didn't it? Ever?
It did really well, yeah.
Well, I think it ended up getting highest box office ever. Before Infinity War came out. I think Infinity War ended up taking the cake, which is well-deserved. I'm a huge fan of cinema, and I thought it was actually really well done. But Black Panther was good. It didn't deserve everything it got.
Right.
I think politics is what pushed it over that hump.
Yeah.
And to make a disclaimer, to not sound like a racist, I do think black people deserve a hero, and I'm glad they got one. I'm just being objective as a cinema critic that it was an okay movie. Politically, I'm glad you got your opportunity to have that hero. I'm still waiting on the 5'6" Latino, so you can screw off.
Yeah, and that's I mean, one of the things that I argue with, because I can pretty much argue with anybody, because whatever position they have, I can take the opposite. I'm totally fine doing that.
Yeah.
I don't know you that well, so we're kind of agreeing with each other, but I can guarantee you I can find stuff that I will disagree with you on. But
I think for a first live stream, this has been great. I've really enjoyed it, and I look forward to finding something we can really sink our teeth into in the future.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Believe me, there's stuff I'll disagree with you on.
Oh, perfect.
But one of the things that I will argue with other conservatives about, people who say white privilege, it's not real. And I go, there's some stuff that's real. There's some stuff that's totally overblown. But one of the things that, and believe me, like I said, I've had a lot of this social justice stuff pounded in my head from going to college.
You weathered the storm much more than I have.
Right. And I can tell you that for me as a white person, actually I'm a card-carrying Native American Indian.
Are you?
I am 5 times more Native American than Elizabeth Warren.
I was about to say something about
but I am enrolled in a tribe, so I do legitimately, but I've never
You don't got to defend yourself, man. Don't worry about it.
I've never, ever claimed it. I always put I'm a white person. Every time I apply for anything, I'm a white person. But anyways.
Unlike the former.
Right. Exactly. So, for me as a white person, I'm always going to be able to see heroes on the screen that are white people. I'm always going to be able to pick up a magazine that shows people who are white people. I'm always going to be able to go to anywhere in America and find other white people that I can talk to that'll understand me. So I always have that. Now, I would make the argument that's not white privilege necessarily. That's majority privilege.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
But still, even having said that, if you are a black person, and for me, I go, it's easy to go, who cares? It's just skin color. Who cares? But I can try and see this from a perspective of, if you are a black person and you say, every time I see a superhero on screen, it's a white person. I mean, there might be some, you could say Hitchcock, what the hell was that name?
Hitchcock? Or Hancock?
Hancock. Right.
That was
with
the
Will
Smith movie? Yeah.
Right. I mean, maybe you could find some examples here and there, although that one may be a little, but to say, like, I remember something that Whoopi Goldberg said.
I love Blade from the 90s, honestly.
Oh, that's another
Blade
good
was
example.
great.
Yeah, that's another good example.
I hold on to. I still watch Blade regularly. It's not to say that I think the issue, if I may, is the social reception when these come out, or the cultural reception when these movies come out. That Black Panther was the first time you had a black superhero with a black villain in a black country front and center. Which the thing is, it took a huge studio run by mostly white people and, you know, mostly probably white money to do it. Which I would argue is, if you're taking a Malcolm X or a Killer Mike approach, that's still not a cultural win. White people profited off black culture. Still, if you're taking the you know, kind of Nation of Islam approach where we take care of our own, white people just made money again off black culture. Is that if you really want to celebrate black culture, and this is because I've gone to the depths of exactly where some of these political movements arise from, and I won't give them that give and take when they're like, well, you just think Black Panther sucked. I was like, yeah, my problem with Black Panther isn't the politics. It's the thing that you guys didn't even win. You know, it was run by Disney, who bought out Marvel, who Marvel was run by a bunch of white guys. You know. It's a cultural win, but it's not a financial win by any means. Sure,
but I think it's more about the optics.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
the politics behind it. Yeah,
and I mean, I can, like I said, I can't really relate to that, but I don't want to necessarily say that just because I can't relate to it, it's not a thing.
That's fair.
But if you're somebody who, that's my identity, is I'm a black person. Like for me, if you ask me what's my identity, white person isn't on the top of the list, but that's me. And I could see somebody else saying, hey, I never see people that look like me. And again, as somebody who's in the majority, that doesn't matter to me. And it could be because I'm in the majority that doesn't matter to me. It's hard for me to really say what that is.
That's true.
But like I was saying about Whoopi Goldberg, is she was a little kid and she saw Star Trek, and she saw a character on Star Trek who wasn't a maid, who wasn't, you know, she's a black woman who had a tech job of some kind and was important on the show. Yeah. And that mattered a lot to her.
Yeah. And I'd agree with her too. Yeah, that's huge. The representation.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, for me, it's, I don't care, but I've always seen people that reflect what I look like. Doesn't matter to me, but I'm not going to disregard that it's not important.
Yeah, I think you and we have a perspective that's a lot more different than most people I run into, and I would imagine you too, is that like like I said, I like a lot of movies and TV shows, and I have no problem watching a movie where I shouldn't or maybe can't identify with the characters. But that's why I enjoy watching the movies. It allows me to get into someone else's world. And like you said, the white privilege side of things is because most of these movies are made by white people with white actors, like you said, it's majority privilege. A majority of the people are it's going to be easier for white people. The point I was making kind of with the Malcolm X Killer Mike angle, Killer Mike is kind of, I think, the closest thing as closest person as a public image to that Malcolm X Blacks for Blacks approach, is that's where my capitalist would come out and say, listen, if you think there's not enough black comic book strips, make one. Stan Lee, you know, he didn't have, when he first started off things, I don't think he had producers and financiers. He was just a guy making a comic, you know? So this is where the social justice issue comes into play. It's like, at the end of the day, emancipate yourself as an individual and beat them at their own game, which I don't think is an approach that's widely discussed in these PC social justice circles. It's, I need to take from you because I've been disenfranchised, not I'm going to create because I have innovation. Yeah.
Which, I mean, and that's part of, you know, in the comic books, Nick Fury is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy.
Right. Yeah. I forgot. He had the little, the grays in his, a little touch of gray around his ears.
Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot about that. And I do think Samuel L. Jackson was an amazing cast for Nick Fury. He absolutely nails it. But you're right. He actually wasn't in the original comic book black guy.
And I don't care.
I don't care either. It turned out great.
I don't care that Jamie Foxx played a white guy and when he played Electro.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Don't care.
I didn't even watch that movie. I heard he did a good job though.
I didn't watch it either.
I was gonna say Tobey Maguire was my Spider-Man, and then I watched like the cartoons a little bit. Actually, this new guy Tom Holland's not bad. I watched his. Did you see that one?
Yeah.
I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to see that. I mean, Spider-Man is a kid.
Yeah.
You know, he goes. That's an important part of his story.
Big time.
And as all the other characters keep getting older, they have to go. Okay, let's get a kid.
Let's get a kid involved, and he does a really good job of being a kid in the story. The Mr. Stark kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Mr. Stark.
Yeah.
And actually does a good job because I think I could get into comic book stuff. We're kind of getting off point. I was just going to say, like, having Iron Man be the start and then, like you said, inserting this kid who has a connection with Tony, who is the guy who started off the whole MCU in general. It's a stroke of genius. I really think they did a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
well,
I think on that note, it kind of would be a good wrap for the live stream.
Sounds sure.
Yeah. Let me take a look at the time. Oh yeah, we're about an hour 30, so it's a little longer than I plan on going, but it was a good conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you. To anyone who's still watching, you know, later on, we didn't really know each other much beforehand. It was just kind of a couple Twitter exchanges and said, "Hey, would you want to be on the podcast?" So, maybe
that was very brave on your part, by the way.
You're not the first random person I've done a podcast with, and this has definitely been the best example I've had thus far. Cool. I've had some interesting ones.
That's either a compliment for me or, man, you've had some rough interviews.
I gotta say, I've only been really going at this for about a month now. I haven't had that many bad ones. I had 2 that were really not bad, just weird. It's just when you leave yourself up to the internet, you never know what you're gonna get. I guess, you know, like what experiences people have been through. So I think just you and I, we just kind of understand the way to debate properly, and I think that's kind of the way we're able to connect so easily. Just understanding the going in with a little bit of humility, seeking to understand is that common ground alone is more than most people are able to get to. And
it makes a big difference when you're not going in trying to own the other side.
Right. I mean, I was looking to teach you anything I have, and I think you were trying to do the same, but I wasn't trying to like gobble you up into my social camp and vice versa. It was just an exchange of ideas. So, we'll look forward to maybe doing something in the future. And on that note, we'll just end abruptly. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, Brian, it was a pleasure.
All right, see ya.
Bye. All right, so I think I'm still streaming, but that went well. Looking forward to having Brian on again, hopefully. And like I had told him in the stream, I'm looking forward to having an intro and an outro ready soon. So this is Mike Pulaski out.